Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique 2-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features Draft a Team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, welcome to this late night edition of the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. I'm Jim. I am joined by Drew and Parker. And Drew, it's good to see you. I think the last time I saw you was in Mobile, right?
Yeah, it was. Glad to be here. Finally.
Yeah. So Parker, I think the last time I saw you was in Mobile with Drew, ironically, and we were at the Mellow Mushroom and just having a good old time before we all went our separate ways.
Yes, sir.
So we are going to go through 7 offensive linemen. A couple of them have been covered on the channel before, and we definitely have a few new names. So ultimately, when we do scouting reports in the channel, our goal is to cover players that are going to be taken round 5 or better. Now, some of these guys didn't make the initial summer scouting list. So when we were doing all of our scouting reports October through December, a few of these guys either weren't on the list or the people that were giving the advice and making the list had low grades on them. However, I think we're going to find that a couple of those guys should be considered round 5 or better, but you're going to have to stay and listen for the LSU guys at the end. With that being said, we're going to start with 3 interior linemen from the University of Cincinnati, starting with Dartanyan Tinsley. So, Drew, what did you have on Tinsley?
I had him right on the line of late 5th or at least 6th. I thought he was probably my favorite of this group outside of the LSU guys, or Jones and Frazier, I should say. I thought there was a little bit of something there.
Cool.
Yeah, no, I like what Tinsley can bring to the table. He's obviously got a great frame, 6'5", 315. I think he'll measure in a little bit taller than that. Honestly, he looks really lean. I think he carries the weight well. I just worry about his play strength. I felt really inconsistent. There was times where it felt like he was knocking guys off the ball in the run game, but then you see him anchor and pass pro, and you just kind of see him get moved quite a bit. And that's really my biggest issue with him. I'm interested to see what his arms, measure in at, just because I feel like he plays a little shorter. He doesn't really maximize whatever length that he's using, and that's those are kind of my issues with him. But I really like his game. I think he gets off the ball really well. I think he could be a very explosive run blocker. I just worry about him as far as being consistent with what he's able to put out there. Just kind of roller coaster watching his film.
For sure. Cool. Yeah. Sorry, you had.
No, go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, I was just agreeing with the carrying the weight well. I thought he was a great mover. That was probably my favorite part of his tape. He was a great puller. He did a great job getting to the second level. I thought probably the most frustrating part of watching him was he really would get lost in the second level a lot. I thought he had a hard time finding guys or tracking them, like backers and DBs out on screens. He'd lose a lot of guys out there, but he's a fast mover for a guy at that size. And yeah, I thought he was much better in the run game. Like Parker just said, the pass blocking was kind of all over the place. But he really struggled to sustain blocks from what I saw. Too. He had a great initial punch, especially in the run game, but he kind of would let guys fold off a little early for me. But yeah.
Okay. And Tinsley is a guard, so I have him labeled as offensive lineman, but I believe he is a guard. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Played opposite Kandra, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, so the next player is Gavin Gerhardt from Cincinnati, and I believe he is their center, correct, Parker?
Yeah. I mean, you can see in the photo too. I mean, I thought he moves really well. Like, I think he's one of the more athletic centers that I was able to watch this year. However, I don't think he actually weighs 300 pounds. I'd be surprised if he came in weighing over 285, 290 when that time rolls around, if he gets a combine invite and is able to get official measurements. But I mean, at the worst, a pro day. But I do believe he's a true 6'4". He looks a lot leaner than you'd see a guy at 6'4", 300. That's the only reason I say that. But again, he makes up for that. He moves extremely well. Kind of like what we said with Tinsley, gets to the second level well, gets out into space really well. But then once he gets up there, he has a really hard time tracking. And that's why I added that as a category when getting out these grades on guys, because I feel like that's such a big thing, especially at the NFL level when you're being asked to move a lot, whether it is out in the perimeter or just to the second level on like combo blocks or just wide zone looks. That's a big thing for me that I feel like translates. Like if you're good at finding those linebackers in the mess or IDing them early and keeping on that track, that usually translates. But when you are getting lost, you're overrunning linebacker. That's why I saw a lot of opportunities. He'd get there. We get there a little too fast, and it looks like he kind of surprised himself at the second level. I think Gerhardt kind of had the same issue where he'd climb really well and like he'd move through double teams. Well, I thought he was a good displacer in those combos, which I like to see from us. You don't really look at it for a lot of power out of these guys often, me personally, at least with centers. It's more how helpful can you be on the combo, and then what do you do when you break off of it? And that's my issue with him, was just, again, tracking at the second level and then getting hands on the stick, kind of like Drew said with Tinsley. I mean, it's just sustaining the blocks, I think, is something that was a trend throughout this entire Cincinnati O-line. It felt like they were, relatively athletic or pretty athletic players, and they could be very strong in the run game, but then the pass game starts to fall apart, or the second level or blocking in space seems to fall apart. And I kind of had all the same points for a lot of these guys. Obviously, I think the one that we haven't spoken about yet is the best of the group, but I really like what Gerhardt can project to do. I just worry about the size, and I worry about if he's able to A, put on good mass moving forward, and B, what that does to his game being a more athletic guy.
Yeah, and I thought Parker hit the nail on the head too. I thought he had some nice flashes of anchor for playing as small as he did, and for being as athletic as he is and small I say with air quotes, as he was. I thought he had a really, really hard time with pad level for a guy that should have that advantage, especially at center. He played really high. A lot of times he had some balance issues. He ended up on the ground a ton from what I watched. Thought his grip strength left a lot to be desired. I thought guys got their hands on him really easily. And specifically the Iowa State game is the one I wanted to touch the most on him. Iowa State, I mean, they were in that typical Big 12 3-3-5, and they sat in drop 8 almost the entire game. And he had a rough day in those the few times he was left one-on-one with those nose tackles at Iowa State. They gave him hell for that game. That one was really concerning to me. But I thought, like you said, the athleticism is at least something there.
Yeah, and you always look for these, quote unquote undersized centers to be, really good with their leverage, and that's where I was really disappointed in his game. But again, if he can fix the pad level, I think he projects really well as just a guy that's going to be able to make a roster and be kind of a flex guy. I'd like to see him work at guard. I think he could play guard very well with just the traits that he has. I just feel like as a center, just struggling at the second level, that's going to be a very big issue moving forward unless he's able to clean that up. But I think he, again, plays really well in space as far as moving around. I think he even pulls well, whether, it's pulling out in the perimeter or getting out in the screen game. Like he checks all those boxes really well. Like all the athleticism boxes, I think he'll be a fine tester. Like I think he has all of that upside. It's just more of the technical refinement in his game. But if he's able to clean stuff up, I think he could be a really good depth piece for a team where he can, again, kind of have that center guard flex, but it's hard to find like a quality center. And I feel like, the snaps were consistent. It's same location, same speed. Quarterback wasn't really worried about it too often throughout the season. But just, kind of those issues with power is really the con in his game. But I love the athletic upside that he brings.
So, and do you guys have Gerhardt outside the 5th round?
Yeah, I have him as a PFA on my board right now.
Same here.
Okay.
I think he was the one of my only non-draftable grades that I've watched so far this year.
Okay. Yeah, so Drew, you just need to stick with the channel more. We will find more undraftable grades.
Oh, I'm sure, dude. I can't wait. I'm going to grind some PFA tape.
Yeah. Okay.
So the money's made. That's where the money's made.
Exactly.
Yes. So Luke Kandra. So the first time we talked about Luke Kandra, his family was retweeting the podcast. Luke Kandra is from Cincinnati. I live outside of Cincinnati. It's a little bit too late, so if they're not watching the podcast right now, I don't blame them. But Drew, what do you have on Luke Kandra?
I had like right on the line of mid to early sixth. I thought there was some really nice stuff with Kandra. I thought he was almost like the polar opposite of Gerhardt and Tinsley to me for a little bit. He was incredible play strength. The guy, I mean, he had hammers for hands. He played super strong. Tons of displacement in the run game. I thought he was, he did lean into punches a little bit. I thought all three of those guys had that tendency. They kind of all ended up off balance and lunging into stuff a little bit. And he let guys into his frame a little bit too easily for me, but he was, the play strength was so strong that it almost didn't matter a lot of the time. I thought he was a bit of a limited athlete. He has trouble on some reaches and getting to the second level. But I mean, the displacement of the run game, the anchor, the play strength was awesome from him.
Yeah, no, for a guy playing over 320, he looks extremely lean, but you can tell that he has the lower half that can really hang. And like kind of like Drew said again, I think he anchors really well in pass pro. His feet kind of die, but he's able to really work that leverage, forklift guys up, and settle into his base. And again, you see that show up in the run game. I mean, he's very dominant off the ball. I think he projects really high, but then like Drew said, he's got the heavier hands, which might, turn into a bigger punch, but also turns into a lot of leaning. It kind of like with the other guys, like we talked about, just sticking to those blocks, falling off blocks a little easy, missing stunts, missing linebackers that come through. That just comes with the territory when you're going to lean like that and be a hand heavy puncher. But if he's able to figure out, sit back into my legs some more, really work that lower body that seems is very well developed for him, I think he projects really high. He's the highest graded I have out of these three guys by quite a wide margin. I have a fourth on him right now. I think taking the traits where he moves well, has that play strength already. You're just kind of, again, like the other guys, you're trying to clean up some of those technical aspect stuff, but not a lot of issues that I don't feel like can be at least worked on and corrected partially throughout a single offseason. That's what I look for in a lot of these guys. Like I've always said, I reserve my fourth round grades for the guys that might have an incomplete profile or they're traitsy and they have the upside that the floor is just a little bit lower. That's where he gets a fourth round grade for me. And, I'll separate my third and fifth. So I usually have a pretty limited group of fourth round picks, but it's just those guys where I kind of like what they can be if they can get the right coaching and they can really take to that. So that's where I slotted him, where that's probably a little higher for some people, but that's just, the group that I have him in.
So Parker, that seems relatively accurate to what I've heard on Kandra before. So there was one draft professor that had Kandra inside of his top 50, which is very generous relative to what I've heard you and Drew say.
Yeah, no, again, it's all about what you prefer. Like I'll say, I've always said, I'm a big floor guy. So if you have a high floor, you're going to be higher up on my board because I know I can assume what I'm going to get out of you on day one, where I feel like Kandra's got a lower floor, but projects really well. So if you like the upside projection, I can definitely see moving him up into a top 75, top 50. Like if you really like him in a weaker, true offensive line class. I also think if you're looking at him as like a center where you feel like he can have that center guard flex, then I can see him bumping up as well, where a lot of the guys in this class are kind of tackles flexing into guard. It's hard to find A, quality centers in this class, and B, quality like center guard flex players in this class. I feel like that's why a guy like Gray Zabel is getting a lot of hype out of the Senior Bowl. That's why, a lot of these guys that are able to show that they can play that center position are going to get moved up board just because it's a really weak center class, in my opinion. And so if he's able to show like a pro day that he's able to work some center, or, I think he's going to be a combine guy. So if he's able to show there that he's able to work at that spot as well, then realistically, I can see that happening. For me, again, I just put guys like that in that fourth round blocks.
Yeah. So, Brandon, to your question, so the players we're covering now, a couple of them were covered before. Kandra was one of them, and then we're about to go through Westen Franklin and some of the LSU offensive linemen. And then the challenge was, well, okay, there were some guys that we didn't cover, but other people are saying that maybe our initial assessment was low. So, Brandon, if you go to the YouTube channel that all the podcasts are broadcast to, you will see two people going through every player in the top 175 of the draft. There's an offensive line channel, there's an edge channel, defensive tackle, running back, wide receiver, tight end, etc. So every position has a channel, and you can hear at least two people kind of discussing what they see in the player. And for example, like Drew, I think you said you have a 6th round grade on Kandra.
Yeah, like an early 6th. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Parker, you said that you're at the 4th, right?
Yeah.
So not all grades come back equal, but at the Draft Professor, this is kind of what we do to make sure that the players that are added to the simulator are likely going to be drafted. And then when I add them, I have to know about how high do I put them, kind of thing, just to get them close. The simulator, once I get them close, the simulator's interactive. So the more somebody picks somebody, the more they move up. So the simulator.
So if you like these guys, just draft them higher.
Yeah, exactly.
Easy.
Exactly.
I think a lot of stuff when you see the difference in grades, it's just like a lot of people, at least with me, and maybe this is the wrong way to look at it, but the archetype of players I like to look for affects my grade a lot. Like receivers is the big example I can think of, is like guys who separate always end up way higher than me for than big body contested guys. I'm kind of the same with guards. I prefer the guys that are maybe a little bit lighter and great movers. Like Steve Avila is one I always point to. I was a huge Steve Avila guy coming out. So that reflects on my grades. Like guys that don't move as well end up being lower, even if they're not necessarily worse prospects. So I think Kandra was kind of a victim of that on my board, at least.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's why I love the multiple people that we have working, because you get a lot of different perspectives on guys. And then at the end of the day, I mean, even when you're talking about NFL teams, I mean, the boards all shake out differently because everybody values certain things and prefers certain things. That's why these conversations are great.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Like I learn probably more from the scouting reports than I do from any other format of talking about the players. Like, it's cool to go over a big board, but if I don't know what Drew values versus what Parker values, it's difficult for me to interpret a big board. So this is a good way for us to just kind of learn how the other people evaluate. So while Parker, Drew, and I hung out for the better part of 4 straight days in Mobile, that doesn't mean that we know how the other person evaluates players.
Mm-hmm.
So Westen Franklin's an interesting one because he was covered and he actually got some really high grades. And somebody said there's potential that he could be center 1 in the class. So Drew, are you buying or selling Westen Franklin as center 1?
I'm certainly not buying center 1. I'd have to sell on that one pretty quick. Okay. Yeah, I had like an early 7th on him, but also it's a very limited sample size. I didn't have that much tape on him. Okay.
So in the tape that you had, what did you see?
I thought he was a good mover. At least it was a really explosive athlete. You could see a guy. I'd be shocked to see him measuring at actually 310. He looked a lot bigger than that on film to me. I thought he was getting to the second level easy. Georgia Tech, they had him pulling a lot. I watched the Georgia game mainly of him, and they had him pulling to seal the backside guy a lot. And he got over there in a hurry. I mean, he was moving well. That's the main thing I want to talk about compared to everything else. That's the one thing keeping that early 7th in place is I thought he was a great mover for his size. The rest of it was, less bright.
Okay.
But
so Parker, how about you?
Yeah, no, again, a player that I can definitely see why people would like his game, because I think he projects well. Again, I think he moves great for his size, like Drew was saying. Like, I mean, if he's like, I think he's playing closer to 320 at least, just based on size comparison on film, which we'll always see what they weigh in at, for their testing weight and whatever. But I thought explosive athlete, like Drew said. But I think the thing that really stood out about his game for me was how strong he was at the point of attack and how he does a great job displacing people on the line. I just think he plays a little tall. And I think technically he's very raw, but you can see the traits, you can see the frame, and he's playing center. So you assume as if you can play center, typically that transition to guard's relatively easy. So you would hope that he could transition both ways. So he's really a three-way player on the interior if you want to look at him that way. And then with the athleticism, with the natural play strength, like I can see the high grade, but again, being a floor guy, I can't really value a player like Weston too highly on my personal board just because the technique's not there. I think if he's not able to really rein in, grabbing outside of his frame, getting really stretched out on certain plays, playing very tall, like those are all kind of not necessarily deal breakers for me, but they're going to drop you down my board quite a way, opposed to a guy that might be less athletic, maybe less strong at the point of attack, but has his technique in check. So really, it's just getting correct, in the weight room and working through those offseason programs and developing as a player. I feel like that's a lot of stuff that you can just kind of lean on over time and as the game slows down for them, opposed to a guy that's really raw and just leaning on his traits. It's harder to break a lot of those bad habits. And that's why he kind of slid down my board. I'd prefer him as like a PFA if I was a team. I'm hoping he slides out. We can grab him after the draft. Could definitely see a team taking a flyer in the third on him. Overall, I have like a late fifth on him just because, again, the traits are hard to really drop too far down your board. But at the end of the day, I'm probably not grabbing him in the draft. I'm hoping he kind of slides and I can get him on the PFA market.
Yep. And one thing I didn't mention on the initial one that I meant to was how fast his hands were, as well as how good of an athlete he was. There were a couple times he got his hands swiped by those Georgia guys, and he got him up in a flash. I mean, in a blink, he had him right back up in his frame. So yeah, there's some traits there to work with for sure. You get him in with a good offensive line coach. I mean, there's a lot to build on there.
Like he'd be a fun like grab in Tennessee, especially if you can get him later on day 3 or as a PFA, just because you get him in with Bill Callahan, let him work. I think he can really do something with him. But outside of that, it's kind of like I don't know what that ceiling looks like.
Yep.
Okay. So Garrett Dellinger, so the first time he was covered on the channel, somebody said round 4 and somebody said priority free agent. The summation that I remembered was the word consistent came up every other sentence. But Parker, what did you have on Garrett Dellinger?
I think Dellinger's funny because I think a lot of people mix him and Miles Frazier up because I feel like my scouting report is opposite a lot of guys, but I also feel like my Frazier scouting report is opposite. Like I feel like a lot of people get them mixed up, and watching the film, it's very easy to do. I mean, those jersey gets bunched. It's 70 and 72. I mean, they play the guard spots. I mean, it's easy to do, and they're very similar build. They're very similar style of player, but I think Garrett Dellinger, for me, the inconsistency is what drops him off the board. Like I have Frazier quite a bit higher than him. And it's because, they're similar players with similar strengths and weaknesses. However, I feel like I know what I'm going to get out of Frazier on a down-to-down basis, whereas Dellinger's kind of averaging out, a lot lower. Where those peaks, like when he's on it and he's looking good, he looks like a better guard than Frazier. But when he's in a slump or just having a rough drive, like that floor is really like it feels like there's times where he just really turns into a turnstile, especially in protection, where the feet are just inconsistent, the play strength is inconsistent. But the flashes, like the high-end flashes, again, like a lot of these guys we've talked about already, I can see the vision. Like if you go get this guy a little earlier than I'd like, I can see the vision. But I just hope you have a plan as far as developing him and finding that consistency for him, especially at the NFL level, where your down-to-down consistency is really what makes you as an interior offensive lineman. And that's just the biggest issue I saw in his game. And I saw that this last week at the Senior Bowl when you had all 3 of these LSU guys down there. The down-to-down consistency from Dellinger just wasn't there for me. And that's my biggest issue with his game comparatively to, his running mate and Frazier, where their game looks very similar, but one of them is always performing at a certain level, it felt like, and the other one's just kind of averaging out to that level.
Got it. Drew, how about you? What did you see with Garrett Dellinger?
I think he's like right in line of early mid-7th for me. I agree with I hate to throw around the consistent buzzword like everyone else does, but it's there for a reason. It's like one play he looks like a late day 2 guy, the next he looks like a PFA. It's pretty volatile on his tape. I thought the play strength was pretty good, even in the lows. The guy's got a lot of power in that frame. The foot speed really concerned me. He really let guys into his frames. You couldn't see the power as much as you'd want to. The punch left a lot to be desired. So yeah, I think exactly what Parker was saying, where it's a guy that, a tradesy guy, where if you think you can reel in the volatile, inconsistent flashes, and coach up on some of that play strength and the traits, could be a guy you reach on a little bit. But yeah, not somebody that I would want to take a risk on if it was me.
I wish I had the Senior Bowl measurables in front of me because he just doesn't play like he's 6'6", 320.
Not at all.
Like you see these other guys that a similar sizes play, and you watch him play, and it feels like he's got that height and the length, but it feels like he's a little lighter in the shorts because, again, like the inconsistent power, you can see the natural strength flash every now and then, but then you see him fall back. It doesn't feel like he's got a well-developed lower half. It doesn't feel like he's got crazy, at least crazy consistent upper body strength, where sometimes he's getting on guys and it's over. Like he ends the rep really early. And there's other times where he lets guys into his chest. He's not able to anchor on it, and he just starts getting run through. And we saw that. You saw that same thing again at the Senior Bowl, where there was one-on-one reps where he would just get bowled over, and there's one-on-one reps where he could stop the rush at the line. And so it was just like, I just don't know. It's hard to evaluate players like that.
Okay, so let's pause for a quick commercial. Drew, do you want to introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, how they can find your content?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Drew, or at Iron City Film on Twitter, or X, where I do pretty much all of my stuff. Every once in a while, I'll do some tape breakdowns over at Fantasy Trading Room or Dynasty Trading Room. You guys can find them on YouTube, all the socials. But yeah, most of my stuff's just on Twitter or X. I'm pretty new to the whole draft professor thing. I met these guys down in Mobile, chopped it up with them for a week. So I'm glad to be here. Yeah, just Twitter or X is the main thing where you can find me.
Cool. Parker.
Yeah, no, everything's going to be on my X. I also write and do shows for the Right Way Sports Network every now and then, so you can find me over there. But if you want to find me, I'll retweet all my articles. I'll post all my articles, and when I'm on shows, I always put all that stuff on my X, even if it's spotlighting on other shows and whatever it might be. All my content's on there. And if you want the more in-depth look at my draft process, my draft board, when I update my boards, the film that I'm able to get, and I'll drop. It all goes to my subscribers on X, so feel free to subscribe to me there. It's a few bucks, but it gets you a lot of content, I feel. If people ever want more, they're welcome to hit me up, and I'll do whatever people want. I kind of throw all my random projects out there, but again, just go follow me at ParkerBlake60 on X, and you'll see everything I'm doing in one way or another.
So I do want to, like Parker, I want to give you a shout out for several things. So first of all, like Parker has done scouting reports on the channel for a little bit, right? But I stuck him with defensive backs, and there were some comments made, we'll just say, but the energy by which you gave scouting reports on day 3 offensive lineman, Parker, like you're in your zone. I can tell. Like I can just tell by how you're articulating the scouting reports. I can tell why you said you wanted to do line. So like it is noticed by me, even if we're, 2,000 miles apart on the planet right now. So,
the DB experience was good for me. It's a position I've been meaning to get into more and watch more film on. It's a position I dread watching, which is what I joked with you about, down at the Senior Bowl where, I watch through all the players that I can, but when it comes to watching DBs, especially in these cut-ups where it's like half the time it feels like they're not doing anything, it just gets hard for me to watch. But I feel like I can apply a lot of the similar, stuff I look for in offensive linemen to DBs. I've always said you can comp, O-line evaluations to DB evaluations. You can comp edge evaluations to wide receiver evaluations. They're relatively similar positions at a high level. And so it was good for me to kind of get into the DB film and see what I really knew, what I could talk about. But yeah, O-line is definitely where I like to think my knowledge base is, and I could talk about it all day.
Well, and you're a high school offensive line coach. So,
yeah, I just got back from working out with my guys. I'm already amped up and ready to go into this thing. So
cool.
There we go.
Well, so the channel is at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. It is the same on YouTube and X. And this channel has daily draft content. So this is the second podcast today that we've done. We have 2 more coming at you tomorrow. We have an Edge episode and a 2026 Big Board episode. Thursday, we have 2 more podcasts coming at you. Friday, we have a 32 GM mock draft, and Drew is going to be one of the 2 people who will be talking about every pick. And as Drew said, we met in Mobile. Literally, I was picking up my credentials and he was picking up his in line right
I was
after
on a mock
me.
draft that night.
Yeah, and from my standpoint at the Draft Professor, we're 32 people. We podcast on the draft. That's what we do. We have a draft simulator. We do other podcasts. We have some other stuff, but we just like talking about this stuff, and we're glad that some of you are listening along for the ride. So now we're going to get to probably the two best linemen in the group. So Emery Jones from LSU. Drew, what do you want to tell us about him?
Yeah. Does it spoil it if I ask Parker if he had Emery or Frazier higher? Am I allowed to ask? I meant to ask him before the podcast started, but I didn't get it in.
No, go for it. It's a conversation.
Who do you have, Parker?
Yeah, I mean, I got Jones higher than Frazier for sure, and it's not quite close for me. I know you have him a little closer than I do.
Really? Okay. Yeah, I ended up with Frazier actually a tiny bit higher on my board. I'm interested to get into that. Yeah, I thought Emery. I assume we both have him at guard too as well.
I think you can go both. I'll let you go.
Okay.
I'll let you go.
Yeah. I'll get to my own rather than ask questions. Yeah. I think he's a guard for me for sure. I think the foot speed was a little bit of a concern. Same with a lot of guys in this class. The arms, he came in at almost 35-inch arms on so there's obviously that. So I'm not saying he can't play tackle. There might be a shot there. I just think if it was me, I'd kick him inside the guard. But he's got an unreal frame. I mean, he's an off the bus guy. I mean, you look at that and you're scared. Got a ton of power in that frame. He's a great athlete for the foot speed is a concern, but otherwise awesome athlete. So much in that frame. The limited pocket range scares me a little bit too. I think against those top end speed rushers, he's going to have a little bit of trouble getting to the top of his depth there. He struggled with cross chops and counters for me too. That inside was really open on that. His hands were not quite where I'd like him to be there. And he lunged into blocks a little bit for me, but again, I mean, the power is just out of this world. On combo blocks, the guy's just killing people. He's about as strong as you can get in that frame.
And what round grade do you have on him, Drew?
I had an early fourth.
Early fourth. So Parker, how about you? What do you have in Emery Jones?
Yeah, no, I was a big fan of Emery Jones. I think when I was getting into the LSU tape, just because I knew there was a number of guys. I mean, I knew about Frazier, Campbell, and Jones early on, so I knew I just needed to watch this LSU tape. So I actually watched a few games through, just watching the line and seeing who stood out, taking notes on those guys. And a guy that was constantly flashing for me was Emery Jones. That's why I think he ended up so high. He just checks the boxes that I value really highly. Like, I think he's a great finisher. I think he sticks on blocks really well and then finishes them to the ground often. I think he's a very strong player. I think he runs his feet very well in the run game. Like, I think his dominance as a run blocker is why I'm so excited about him, especially if he projects inside. I do think he's a guy that can do both. I think he can be a true flex guard tackle for you at the next level. I think he can hang at tackle. I do worry about, kind of like Drew said, I think guys can bend that corner on him a little bit. I think he's very active and very aggressive in his sets. He's a big jump setter. And when he gets back into his, more vertical sets, he opens his hips a little early, which is something that I think a lot of guys at the college level do nowadays. It's something that I always gripe and I always emphasize with my guys. I don't think is developed well. I think guys are okay letting guys open up and kind of run the pocket laterally, whereas I keep my guys square and just vertical in their sets early on. I think that's something that he could really improve on. And, getting hands on early is something that he really excels at. But like Drew said, when he leans into that punch, that's why he gets beat on the inside, because he kind of goes all out when he goes for contact. And when he lands, like, it's a significant punch, he's able to just run his feet through and finish blocks, whether it's in the pass game or the run game. But if he lands and you're able to get those hands off, he doesn't really recover at all. If you want to say below average, that's a nicer way to say it. But he just really struggles getting those hands back in. I mean, Drew talked earlier about, guys, when the hands come off, they're able to replace very quickly. He's the opposite of that. If he gets hands on early, shut down, he can shut down the rep early. But if he gets hands on and you're able to work, pass rush moves, you have a wider toolbox, you're able to counter, he's really going to struggle with you. And that's why I think it's good for him to start as a guard at the next level and really refine that hand fighting. You're going to have that at a high level on the interior in the NFL. But I think over time, as the game slows down for him, he gets more comfortable with using his hands. I think he'd bump out for you in a pinch. Like, if you have a tackle go down, you don't feel great about the next guy, you can definitely bump Emery Jones back out there. But I do think he projects better as a guard. I don't have him listed as a guard right now. I think I'm going to go through the whole process, I'm going to leave Campbell and Jones at tackle with kind of a note, kind of on the side saying, I like his projection at guard, but where they end up on my board is going to be their tackle ranking. I'm not going to move a lot of these tackles in as far as my ranking goes. And it's just because you don't want to have an overcrowded interior class and a weak tackle class when some guys, we saw Skoronski go. He was getting run at tackle. We see these guys that get shots at tackle in the NFL. So, but overall, I'm a big fan of Emery Jones on the LSU offensive line. I think he's my best graded LSU offensive lineman out of the three top guys in Frazier, Campbell, and Jones. And I have Frazier and Campbell not too far behind him. Like I said, I think they're pretty evenly staggered, the three of them, but between Frazier and Jones is a pretty significant gap. But just a kind of a fan of the three of them. I think Jones is the most consistent guy out of the group. It's also consistently struggling with the same things over and over again. So
where is Jones on your board, Parker?
I have him. He's a top 40 guy for me. I think I have him outside of the 30s, outside of like the early 30s, like first round.
Got it.
I don't like saying a first round grade because 31, 32 isn't necessarily a first round grade, but I don't have a first round grade on him. I just have him kind of probably in that mid 30s to early 40s.
And you said you have Jones higher than Campbell. I heard you say that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. And that was something that I just learned. So that was pretty cool.
I like to hear that, actually. That makes me feel a little bit better on my Campbell takes. I've not been a huge Campbell guy in this cycle either. So that makes me feel a little bit validated.
Yep. So Drew, have you done Jones already?
What do you mean? Like, had I watched him previous to this?
No. Had I already asked you? I've already forgotten who I asked first.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. You started me with Jones.
Okay, that was a brain stall. Sorry about that.
No, you're
cool.
good.
Okay, so Miles Frazier. So Drew, I think you're going to be higher on Frazier. So why don't you kick this one off?
Sure. Yeah, and they might end up I don't think my board's this deep, but once I put it together, they might actually be like right next to each other. He's also an early fourth, just maybe a tiny bit higher on the grading scale. Frazier, for a guy that big and that strong, he has some burst. You blink and that guy's in a different gap. The lateral movement on that guy is awesome. He's a great puller for that reason. I think kind of what we were talking about with Tinsley earlier at the beginning of this. He does such a great job getting to that second level, and then he starts to get lost once he gets there. Has trouble tracking guys for a little bit, but he gets there in a flash. He's so athletic for that frame. So much play strength, so much pop in those hands, the punch power, the timing. It's all great. Yeah, the recognition of stunts is one thing that really jumped for me with him. I meant to talk about that with Cincinnati guys too. I thought they were all pretty good at that. But it's just automatic with this guy. He has no issues with stunts whatsoever. I think he does tend to lunge into the blocks a little bit. Same with what Jones does. Which you can get away with that a little bit more at guard than you can at tackle, like Emery was. So it's a little bit more forgiving there. But yeah, I think there's so much power there, and he's such a good athlete for that big of a frame. I love Frazier, and he had a great week in Mobile.
Yeah, even flexed out the tackle down in Mobile, and I thought he held up well out there. So
yep.
Another potential flex guy. I feel like this is just a class full of guys that are playing multiple positions. So it's fun to see, fun to watch, fun to project, but it's also, I think it says a lot about the quality of the class where you usually get your true tackles because a guy's just that good at tackle. You get like your true guards because a guy's that good at guard. And I feel like this class is a bunch of guys that have good traits that you want out on the field, and so you're trying to find spots for these guys to fit. And that's where I think the high flexibility really comes from. But yeah, Frazier, I think like I talked about earlier, I thought he was extremely consistent. Like you knew down to down what you were going to get from him, but it was also, for better or for worse, where, I thought he does a great job of getting hands on, but I feel like he doesn't do a great job of letting go when he has to. And that's where I thought he ended up on the ground a lot more than he should have. But I think it was just, sticking on blocks, being hand heavy. I thought he does a great job, like Drew said. I think he's a very strong athlete, very athletic athlete. He checks both of those boxes. He drives guys off the ball extremely well. I think he moves well in his set. I think that's why he hung out well at tackle because, one-on-ones really, you're just jump setting most of the time anyway as a tackle. And so was able to translate that pretty well. I'd be interested to see him work more, vertical sets, work in those combine style drills. Overall, just really a fan I thought he had really good foot speed, especially on a line full of guys where I thought they had more concrete shoes on. But at the end of the day, when you watch the line over and over and over again, Frazier's the guy that stands out where he's moving well in space, moving well at the second level. He's getting off the ball quick. He just checks all those boxes, and he's got a really high floor for me. I just don't think he projects to have a great ceiling. And so the guy you get, after the draft is going to be pretty solid day one, but then you get to him in year 3, and he's probably not going to have come very far because I don't think he has a lot to fix with his game, but I also don't think there's a lot more that he can gain as far as a player. So it's a player that I'd take it on day 2, but just kind of knowing that this is going to be a quality depth guy that can fill in at spots. But I don't think he's ever going to, he's not going to be pushing for Pro Bowls or all pros. He's just going to be kind of a good utility guy, a good guy to have in the room, a good guy to have on your game day 48, like just a good guy to have in the building, but you're also not going to want him to be your number 1 guy. But big fan of Frazier as a prospect and what he can do, especially in a weaker O-line class. Like, I think he brings lots to the table that teams are going to like.
Cool. So I I think on Frazier, I think I heard the same exact thing out of both of you. Kind of thing, just like the scouting report to me, that sounded really, really good. So
kind of goes along with how consistent his tape was. So yeah, he was just. I mean, there's you see exactly what you get with Frazier.
Yep. And the channel hadn't covered Frazier before, so to the best of my knowledge, you two were the first ones to cover him on the channel. So
I think he was the first LSU offensive lineman I actually watched multiple games of just him because. Again, when I was watching the film, it was him and Emery Jones standing out. And I'd already seen Emery Jones' name on some boards. I was like, oh, Frazier could be a fun little sleeper. I think guys have gotten hip to him, especially, the Senior Bowl was really good exposure for him. But he was a guy early on that, I had pushing for an early day 2 grade. Kind of like I said, the range that I have Emery in now is where I had Frazier at the beginning of the process when I had a preliminary first-round grade on Jones. So, they both kind of slid down an equal amount, but I'm a big fan of both players. I'd love to have both. So
cool. So that wraps up. Yep. That wraps up the players we were going to cover today. But I do want to say thank you. There's a lot of you watching. So hit that subscribe and hit that like, please. The channel has daily draft content, and we come at you with lots of positions in lots of different formats. So if you are looking for that top 10 offensive lineman show, we do have those, but we don't do those very often. We tend to maybe go into the weeds a little bit more. Next week, Parker and Drew are going to talk to you about real offensive tackles. So that would be
not the flex guys.
Say that again, Parker.
That's scarcity in this class.
Not the flex guys. Not these guys that are, are they a guard or are they a tackle? Or, although I think he plays guard better, we want to talk about the guys that actually are going to play tackle out of this class.
I'll see the whole 2.5 of those I have on my board.
All 2 of them.
Yeah. So there's always a lot of discussion about, Will Campbell's a better guard. Is Savane a guard or a tackle? And you hear that about some of the top guys. But if your team needs a tackle, we are going to put an episode together for you to cover the players that play tackle and where they are on the board. Now, some of the guys are going to be, round 6, round 7 guys. But they tend to have the measurables to play tackle. So that's what we're going to put together for you for next Wednesday with Parker and Drew. And then we will take it from there. Any parting words, Drew?
That's a good question. None that come to mind. Just excited to be a regular on here and excited to get into the tackles for sure. The few true tackles. That's a nice thing to talk about and refreshing in this draft class.
So
I think
Parker, any parting words as we wind things down here?
Yeah, no, I a little not. I guess we'll call it a teaser, but I think one of my hottest draft takes is what the Chiefs are doing. I do these first round mocks, try and get them out now that we're in that season. I got to start doing more just first round mocks. But I talk about the Chiefs kind of sitting back there at the 31-32 spot. I think that's a interesting position for some of these guys that might be a true tackle, as they're not really looking for a guard tackle flex guy. They need to fix a tackle problem. And so the guy that I like mocking to them, I thought had a great Senior Bowl week. And I think a lot of people are kind of shocked when I put him into that spot, but I think it's a great fit for him and what they need. So, I mean, definitely worth tuning in next week for sure.
Cool. Yes. So for everybody watching, thank you. You are appreciated. And check out our draft content. Our YouTube station is full of draft content, and we are generally coming at you with 2 podcasts a day from now up until draft day. So for Drew, Parker, myself, the other 32 podcasters at Draft Professor, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on a podcast again tomorrow. Thank you for watching this episode of Mrs. R Relevant, the Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on X at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. Please follow the Draft Professor channel on YouTube at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. We look forward to seeing you on our podcast tomorrow.